Welcome to this special episode of the Benjamin Anthony Show, a product of the MirYam Institute, and following the issuance of arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the former Minister of Defense of the States of Israel, Yoav Gallant, by the International Criminal Court, I have asked to learn from one of the foremost experts available to us in this field, Professor Avi Bell. You have all heard his bio. You are all familiar with how learned this individual is. And I truly could not think of anybody that I'd rather interview at this time in order to set the record straight and also to lay the table for what we're actually looking at by way of these arrest warrants. So, Professor Bell, thank you so much for being with us. I know it's late there where you are in Israel, but you made time immediately upon request, and I just want to say thank you in advance.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. So, Professor, the first thing that I'd like to begin with is a period of deliberation. This has been deliberated, in parentheses, by Karim Khan, the prosecutor of the ICC, for a period of approximately 6 months. You and I actually spoke during that period, and he has reached a conclusion that really defies all logic, I would say, and really flies in the face of all evidence and seems to be founded at best upon hearsay. Can you take us behind the scenes and tell us what sort of deliberations have been undertaken, if any, that could have possibly led to this decision during these intervening months?
I don't think that the right time framework in which to look at this is the last half a year.
Perfect. Tell
You
me.
have to walk back a considerable distance to 2009. In 2009, the PLO started contacts with the International Criminal Court's prosecutor at that time, Ocampo, in an effort to join the court in order to create criminal charges against Israel. This was the fruition of a strategy of lawfare that was publicly announced by Mahmoud Abbas, the chair of the Palestine Liberation Organization. And it took some while for the excuse me, the court to agree to take jurisdiction. It was a problem because there clearly is no legal ground for the court taking jurisdiction in this case. It has to be authorized by a state, and there is no state of Palestine. But they one after another, together, the PLO and the ICC prosecutor worked through theories by which they were going to do this, and bit by bit they built up the framework of first claiming jurisdiction and then sorting through a variety of meritless charges against Israelis, where the aim was, of course, always to get to the Prime Minister of Israel at the time, whoever it might be, but also to get at other senior Israelis and maybe junior Israelis as well. So that was it began in 2009, two prosecutors ago. And Ocampo left, and his successor, Bensouda, continued in this path, and Karim Khan came in with the same aim. Karim Khan is, let's say, more of a risk taker than his predecessors. Still a politician, but more willing to go out on a limb with preposterous legal theories in order to go after big splashy indictments, and that's what led to this case. Now, the particular charges that Khan came upon, I think there's sort of accidental. I think when in 2001, when he decided he was going to prosecute Israelis and they launched the full-fledged investigation against Israeli defendants. He didn't have in mind, he obviously couldn't know yet that there was going to be this war. He was thinking about prosecuting alleged war crimes in some other context. Now, it was always clear that he wanted to prosecute war crimes. It didn't, because neither the faction or the law make a difference here. He began with the decision of who his defendants were. But the war came about, and he picked a couple of charges. Now, why did he pick these particular charges? So he pretends that it's innocent reasons. It's very clearly not, because the major charges that he outlined are meritless. I think that he chose these charges because they most closely match the rhetoric that parts of the Biden administration has used against Israel. Pressure on Israel to admit so-called humanitarian aid, and the repeated mantra that's said by some officials in the Biden administration that, quotes, too many Palestinians have died. Right? And I think those are the guidelines for the charges that he put together. And what we've been waiting for is not for him to decide on those charges. For the last 6 months, what we've basically been waiting for after he decided on those charges was for him to get official approval. The way that the ICC works is that the prosecutor, once the prosecutor's decided that he wants to present charges against someone, he has to go to what's called the pretrial chamber. Now, the pretrial chamber is just a three-person panel of the court. But he goes to the judges and asks for permission. And it was fairly clear what the judges were going to do too, but for them, it was more a question of what the right timing was. And it's not 100% clear what led to their timing, but I can take a guess here too. And my guess would be that the major factors behind their timing was to get this done before Biden left office, in order to make sure that at least initially they're not met with U.S. sanctions. And the other thing is that one of the things that they've wanted since the outset is the fig leaf of bringing charges against someone from Hamas as well.
Right.
And when Khan announced this, he announced that he was also going to indict three Palestinians, Mohammed Def, Yihya Sinwar, and Ismail Ania, all of whom are now dead. Now, the court pretends it doesn't know this. And so it has waited each time until Khan notified the court that these individuals were dead, and asked nonetheless that they proceed on the rest of the indictments. So the indictments that were just handed out by the court, that were just approved by the court, are for Netanyahu, Gallant, and for Mohammed Def. Mohammed Def, of course, has been dead for several months. Um, and Hamas just admitted that he's dead about 2.5 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I get the feeling that it was increasingly implausible for them to pretend not to know that he was dead, and so they want to hurry and get these charges out with the Mohammed Def fig leaf before it became totally preposterous. Right? So that's what they did. Right? But that's only about the timing of it. I think that we've been headed in this direction for more than a decade. And both the actual charges and the timing of the charges are purely for instrumental political reasons and have nothing to do with the lack of legal merit or the lack of evidence or any of the other flaws of the case.
Yeah, and so much of what you just said there has absolutely nothing to do with any legal aspects or gathering of evidence whatsoever. It's merely political maneuvering. Are you saying, suggesting, and I readily accept this if so, incidentally, but are you saying that essentially this was lobbed up by the rhetoric of the Biden administration and then hit almost as a tennis smash by the ICC? As a result of that, was their rhetoric really so helpful in the ICC's preparation of the ground for the issuance of these arrest warrants?
Again, I think that in the ICC, the bureaucrats reached the decision that they're going to file meritless charges against Israeli Jews more than a decade ago. And so it's not because of anything the Biden administration did. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Biden was not yet in office. So that part's unfair, but it's impossible to ignore the correspondence between the fake charges that the ICC has raised in these indictments and the fake charges that the Biden administration has repeatedly raised against Israel. Now, I don't know if this is a matter of the Biden administration lobbing it so that they'll smash it over the net, or it's just a matter of the ICC adjusting its strategy to dissipate potential U.S. Objections. I suspect more the latter than the
Mhm.
former, but it might be the former. It might very well be that this was that the Biden administration was aiming at this, was aiming at giving the ICC the ability to file meritless charges against Israelis. It might very well be.
So, and you've given me permission to call you Avi, right? Rather than
Absolutely.
Professor. So Avi, I used to lecture very, very frequently on the university campuses, and I also used to facilitate lectures on the campuses at the behest of the law students at many of the law schools by members of the Advocate General's Corps, the Military Advocate General's Corps of the Israel Defense Forces. And I did so during very eventful years, including 2014 after Operation Protective Edge, for example. You remember with the infamous Goldstone report that emanated from that. And one of the things that constantly, I wouldn't say constantly, that's not fair, but was of common concern and worry to the various representatives of the Military Advocate General's Corps that I would bring was this fear that an Israeli would be issued with an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court. Now, I'm going back to 2014 at least. And so I wonder, given that you're tracking this back to 2009 and I can track back Israel's worries until 2014, has Israel somehow been caught flat-footed here? Is there something that Israel could have done via the legal process that it has not done?
I think that legally, Israel did everything it could, more
Mhm.
than it should have. Um,
Tell me about
this
that.
is an
That's a
argument.
very
Yeah,
interesting phrase. Tell me about that phrase more than it should have.
this is an argument that I've had with the people who are sending you to lecture for more than a decade, really, since the beginning of this. And I've always argued that the way to look at this is not as a legal process, but as a political process. And it's a mistake for Israel in any way to engage the institution as if it's a legal institution. That's
Mm.
giving it unwarranted credibility. Right. So it's a mistake, I said, to make legal arguments to the court, to cooperate with the court in various ways. So I'll give you an example. Since October 7th, um, the Israeli legal advisors dealing with this issue invited more than once, invited Karim Khan, the prosecutor, to come to Israel to talk with victims of Hamas crimes and to talk with Israel about its arguments about jurisdiction and to talk with Israel about the fact that Israel does not commit crimes. And I think this is a terrible mistake. It's not because the legal advisors are wrong. They're absolutely right. That is, Hamas did commit horrific crimes. And Israel has been bending over backwards to try to abide by a fairly strict interpretation of the rules. But it's a mistake to think that there's any chance of influencing decision making in the ICC with legal argumentation. They don't care. And it's a mistake, therefore, to make it easier for the ICC to present meritless charges. Now, it happens to be a fact that over the 2 decades in which the ICC has been functioning, it's been forced more than once to drop charges that it wanted to present because the country where they wanted to present the charges, the leaders of that country refused to cooperate. They wouldn't allow the ICC personnel to land anywhere near the country, and they
Mm.
did other things to make sure that potential collaborators would not work with the ICC. And I think that that is a much more promising strategy than trying to make arguments as if there's anybody in the ICC operating in good faith. And so you're right that Israeli legal authorities have been worrying about this for many, many years, but the strategy they used for it was entirely wrong. Right. Now, that said, I wouldn't I wouldn't blame them for the outcome because, as I've said, the ICC has been headed in this direction for more than a decade, and so cooperating or not, this is where the ICC was headed, and non-cooperation is a strategy for blocking them. It might work, but it might not work.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't say that it's their fault for failing to protect Israel. I think that they just made a bad strategic decision. And no matter how much evidence accumulated that they were barking up the wrong tree, that they were trying to find a defense where it would never work, they kept up with the same strategy. And for all I know, they're going to keep up with the same strategy even now. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, they weren't sending me. I was sending them at the behest of the law students who wanted to understand the laws of armed conflict from the perspective of Israeli practitioners, because they were almost in a laboratory of the application of that law in 2014, in 2012, in 2008 and 9 when we were operating inside the Gaza Strip. But there's another group out there that I think really warrants having a reckoning with itself, and that's the Israeli media. And as I look at the Israeli media, the Hebrew language, and listen to the Hebrew language Israeli media coverage of this development, the issuance of these warrants, I'm irritated by the fact that they place so much responsibility for the issuance of these warrants on statements made by Israeli policymakers, including, incidentally, Yoav Gallant, including Itamar Ben-Gvir. Surely that is not cause for what the ICC has done.
No, of course it's not. But you should understand where that's coming from. Okay, what this stems from is a confusion among almost universally in the Israeli media between the two major international courts in The Hague. What
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about today is the International Criminal Court, the
Yes.
ICC. What all the Israeli media is confused about is they believe that there's no difference between the ICC and something called the ICJ, the
Mm-hmm.
International Court of Justice. Um, and the ICJ is currently entertaining its own set of
Right.
meritless suits against Israel, including the preposterous claim of the government of South Africa that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza by defending itself according to the laws of war. So, why is that relevant? It's relevant because while the ICJ is deliberating its case, the genocide case involving South Africa, it's issued a whole series of orders against Israel. And one of the orders that it issued against Israel is it ordered the legal authorities in Israel to clamp down on incitement to genocide allegedly being carried out by senior Israeli officials.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is preposterous, but unfortunately, Israel has had the right in the ICJ for this case to send um, a judge just for this case, an Israeli judge just for this case, and the person that they sent was the former president of the Israeli Supreme Court, Aaron Barak, and unfathomably, Barak joined two of the court's orders against Israel. And one of the two that he enjoined was the order to clamp down on incitement. And so he, again, this is unfathomable. I can't understand what he was possibly
I
thinking.
agree. I
But
remember it. I agree with you. Totally unfathomable.
right. But what he did was he gave credence to this. And so the Israeli media is a little confused between the ICC and the ICJ, and they believe that this is a major issue because of Barak's strange and really damaging decision. But the statements have nothing
Right.
whatsoever to do with the ICC decision to issue the arrest warrants.
So, can you talk to us about the implications of this issuance? What are the ramifications of this in reality for Prime Minister Netanyahu and for Defense Minister Gallant? Let's start with those two, and then I have a follow-up question.
Okay, so in theory, After there's an arrest warrant, um, and eventually after the defendants are turned over to the custody of the ICC, the ICC holds a trial, and if they're convicted, they can be placed in jail. The ICC doesn't have any jail space, so it has to request it from friendly European states, but I'm sure that Holland will be happy to put the Israeli prime minister in jail for any reason whatsoever, same as France and
Yeah.
any number of other states. Now that's the theory of it. The reality is the ICC can't force a trial, right? It can only hold a trial if the defendant is present. And neither Netanyahu nor Gallant is foolish enough to trust the goodwill of the court to actually hold an objective trial. They understand fully well that this is going to be a Dreyfus trial
Right.
if one is held. They're guilty by virtue of being Jewish and walking in. So they're not going to turn themselves over. So really, the implications of the arrest warrants are they have to avoid being located in jurisdictions where there's a danger that the government is going to turn them over to the ICC. Now, there are already several states that have announced that they're happy to do so. I believe so far Holland and France have done so, and Justin Trudeau, on behalf of Canada, has announced that he wants to do that as well. I'm sure there will be more states that will announce this. I also, by the way, am quite sure there are a number of states that are members of the ICC that are parties to the Rome Statute that they're going to announce that they are not going to participate in this outrage. They are not going to, under any circumstances, turn over the Israeli defendants. So I don't yet know the full list of countries that are going to do this, but that's the major implication. Gallant and Netanyahu have to be careful where they travel. And also, you have to remember that this is an ongoing investigation. I am absolutely certain that Karim Khan is not done. He wants to present more indictments against more Israeli Jews, for made up crimes, big and small, and defendants, big and small. And so other Israelis have to be careful as well. You never know when a secret indictment is going to come out, and all of a sudden you find yourself in the soil of I don't know, France, and they're going to try to arrest you and send you off to this kangaroo court.
Yeah, you've really preempted my follow-up question, which is what are the implications of this for IDF generals? What are the implications of this for the more than 300,000 soldiers who have played a valiant role in service to the country since the atrocity of October the 7th? I, years ago, traveled to South Africa, and I went there in order to speak about my own military experience, and I was harassed as a result of universal jurisdiction. It was eventually ironed out by one of the Christian groups there that was responsible for bringing me to talk. But I can well imagine that if within I think it's 124 countries, correct me if I'm mistaken, please, Avi, who are party to the Rome Statute, I can imagine that there's a significant number of countries on a significant number of continents who would actually sign up to enforce this. And that, of course, affects not only the freedom of travel of Gallant, Netanyahu generals, and potentially simple soldiers. Again, tell me if I'm mistaken, but it surely also affects Israel's ability to enter into trade agreements and so forth. We know that Prime Minister Netanyahu is somebody who was in the throes of opening up the continent of Africa for precisely that some years ago prior to COVID. He's not going to be able to do that, is he, under the current circumstances?
I wouldn't exaggerate the threat here. Having said that, anybody is potentially
Mm-hmm.
the target of an arrest warrant, and it's not just generals and not just soldiers, right? The ICC can prosecute crimes against humanity, and one of the charges that they were investigating was prosecuting Israeli Jews for the crime against humanity of living in areas where the Palestinians believe Jews should not reside. Right. So everybody can be a criminal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a,
Right.
but the limiting factor here is not their ability to create false charges. It's they have limited resources, and the ICC has successfully prosecuted very, very few cases, and it's going to choose its defendants based on political utility. That is,
I see.
how right? How much of a splash are they going to get by announcing charges against this individual? What are the chances they're going to actually get this person into custody? Um, and a variety of other things that basically have to do with the political viability for the
Hmm.
ICC of going after this person. So I don't think that all that many charges will eventually be filed. It's going to be a number that the ICC considers manageable, and in making those choices, it's going to consider political profile. So it may be that you're a big enough fish to go after, but it may not be, right? Now, the other thing is um, most countries in the world have a pragmatic relationship with international law and the rulings of international institutions. And so they'll talk a very nice game, but let's say if there's an opportunity for a country in sub-Saharan Africa to develop a major economic opportunity, and the price is that they have to not turn over Israelis to the ICC. I'm
Right.
sure most of them most of them will make the pragmatic choice and agree not to turn over Israelis. And so I don't think this kills all of Israel's relations with African states or with European states. European states, I think, are willing to pay a bigger price. It's a little bit ironic. We're heading into a phase of the conflict against Israel, the war against Israel, where I think that Europe is becoming a more prominent player as an enemy of Israel than the Arab states are. Well, soon we may have to stop calling it the Arab-Israeli conflict and call it the Euro-Israeli conflict. Um, but even European states, they're not uniform, and many of them are pragmatic. And even those which you wouldn't think of as pragmatic can be, right? So it's a very potent and helpful political issue in France to go after the Jewish state and more generally against Jews. Um, that said, they're quite willing to sacrifice their principles. The governments of France in recent years have been quite willing to sacrifice their principles for economic opportunity. So even in France, I'm not sure that they would go to the end of the line in blocking Israel. So I wouldn't exaggerate the danger. It's a real danger and it's there, but don't make it bigger than it is.
That's comforting to hear, and I appreciate you saying that. Let me just ask you a couple of just two or three last questions because I want to be respectful of your time and more precisely of the hour where you are. And obviously, this is going to be used as a bludgeon against Jewish students, Jewish professors, pro-Israel groups throughout the international community, including in Europe, but also including in the United States of America. How would you advise a student or a pro-Israel campaigner or representative to go about refuting the validity of this development? What can a pro-Israel Jew in the United States of America do in order to demolish the effectiveness of this development when it's leveled against him or her?
Well, I'm not sure there's a way to do it, and let me explain what I mean. If you look around the United States right now, and you look at the anti-Semitic mobs that carry out actions on campuses, um, so part of their rhetoric is they're protecting the Palestinian people from Israeli genocide, right? And it's become increasingly clear since October 7th the degree of interconnectivity between anti-Semitism and anti-Israel or pro-Palestinian activism. They're intimately linked in so many different ways, and the anti-Israel rhetoric feeds directly into anti-Semitic violence. But it has nothing to do with truth. It's about markers, identity markers. Right? The anti-Semitic mobs on campus are not there because they've been persuaded by rational arguments that they ought to hate Jews for Israel allegedly committing genocide. They probably couldn't find Israel on a map, right? Um, it's because of the political structures on campus and the images of themselves they want to project that they're joining this, and it's a mistake to engage them as if there's some rational argument that's going to turn them. It's not going to. Um, there's a famous story about Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was a
Mhm.
right. He was a former president of the United States. Before that, he was a senator from Texas, and um, I'm gonna eliminate the vulgarities because Johnson had a very unique way of expressing himself that's not fit for a PG audience.
Yeah.
But um, uh, Johnson, when he was running for the Senate, decided that he was going to attack his opponent who owned a ranch. Um, he said to his aide, "I want to attack him for fornicating with his pigs." And his aide was outraged. He said, "You can't say that. You know that's not true. What do you
Mhm.
can't even use those words, right?" And Johnson said, "Yeah, but the son of a bitch is going to have to deny it." And that's the whole point. The whole point of this is, you make the outrageous charges. Now they're associated with you. You charge Israel with genocide. Of course, it's not true, but who cares? Now we're arguing about it, right? Now we have to deny it. And so I don't think that it may be that we do have to deny it, but let's understand that that's not what the fight's about. It's not what's going to persuade people, right? There may be some people who are ignorant or not predisposed to believe any claim of evil deeds done by the Jewish state. But that's not really the people that we're talking about. I don't think that the way to think about this. How do Jews facing anti-Semitism on campus and mobs on the streets of New York and Los Angeles, how do they defend themselves with rational argumentation? How do they rebut the outrageous charges that are included in this indictment? That's not the question at all, right? Um, I think that what we have to talk about with people who are inclined to be with us, who inclined to fight prejudice against Jews instead of supporting it. With those people, we have to talk pragmatically about how to fight prejudice. It may be that they have questions out of curiosity about the degree to which the statements made, the claims made are false. But I think for the most part, the degree to which there's false screams at any reader who does not come in there with prejudice against Jews. And so um, I don't imagine that's a very significant part of the kinds of conversations we have to carry out. For the most part, what we have to do is figure out how those people we know are anti-Semitic and who are being violent against Jews, how do we stop them from victimizing Jews based on their prejudice? It's not how to make arguments about the rhetoric that they use.
Yeah, you're almost transposing what you said about Israel not engaging with the court onto the student atmosphere, right? You're saying just try not to engage, disengage. It doesn't warrant engagement. It's not going to help us. You're a legal scholar, and so you obviously hold the law in high esteem, and you must be looking on and seeing that through that prism, the supposed guardians of civility have really become the protectors of barbarism and the advocates of savagery. And when I see that charges include withholding food and medicine and electricity and deliberately targeting civilians. And I note, of course, that that's precisely what Hamas did on October 7th to Israeli civilians. And it's precisely what's being carried out against our more than 100 hostages still in captivity inside the Gaza Strip. And when I think about the fact that IDF soldiers are risking their lives in order to shepherd Gazans away from conflict zones time after time after time in order to preserve the lives of the Gazan population, when I consider the fact, Avi, that despite us moving the population and holding them in areas far away from the firing line, we are still accused of committing a genocide, despite the fact that we're looking after more than close to 1 million Gazans at this stage. I just wonder how this leaves you thinking about the nobility of the law, thinking about the process of gathering evidence, and thinking about reaching a reasonable conclusion. I mean, I know I've thrown a lot out there, but tackle, if you would, just the very fact that so much of this is based on nothing more than hearsay. I mean, Khan didn't even
Much
visit
less than
Gaza.
hearsay. Much less than hearsay.
Tell me about that. I
Right,
mean,
but
tackle those issues.
let me. I will be happy to. Let me just say something more generally about what you're talking about the
Yeah.
nobility of the law. I'm not a believer in the intrinsic nobility of the law. I think law is an intellectually fascinating pursuit, but the law is a tool, and it can be good or it can be bad. I wouldn't talk about the nobility of Nazi law, right?
Right.
I would talk about its evil.
Right.
And you can look at the, let's say, Soviet law, which often sounded very, very impressive, but then you look at the way it played out, and it was not noble, and it was
Mhm.
not just.
Mhm.
It was quite the opposite. So when you're looking at the way that the law is employed by institutions like the ICC, which you're quite right are promoting the agenda of the world's worst barbarians. So, promoting the agenda of terrorists in order to pursue cases against the innocent and make outrageous false claims against them, then that's not something where I have respect for the law,
Mhm.
because I think that this is a version of the law which is a moral abomination. Right? I think that the ICC is an abomination. Um, Now, I'll add that, to the degree that I would like international legal institutions to promote justice, I think that the what the ICC has done has been to harm more than anyone else the prospects of that ever happening. I think that it has brought disrepute to international law. It has brought disrepute to international courts. It has brought disrepute to the entire system, at the degree there is one, of international justice. And so, if you want the international legal system to amount to something, to promote justice, then you should be outraged at what the ICC has done. Now, if you look at the mechanics of the case that they put together, and I think that's what you're asking about when you're asking about, like, how do we line up the facts and the evidence as we know them with what they're saying. So we don't. The cases, right? The indictments that have been presented against Netanyahu and Gallant are based upon misstatements of the law and misstatements of the fact, and presumed evil motive. That's the underpinning of every major anti-Israel accusation over the years. And it's the underpinning of this one. You distort the facts, you distort the law, and you fill in the gaps by assuming that Israel is always evil. And while affording everyone else, even the Hamas terrorists, the presumption of innocence, of good motive. Right? And that's the way this is done. Now, the precise mechanics are not entirely clear because these are secret indictments. You can't actually see the charge sheets. You only get what they've given in their public statements. Right. But in the public statements, you can see that the major crime that Gallant and Netanyahu are charged with is deliberately starving the Palestinian population. Now, you think about that for a moment. Like, how do you establish a crime like that? So, it's a crime of motivation, right? That their intent was to starve. So, there's only two ways you can prove intent really in a court. You can prove it if they said so, right? If you have notes from a meeting, like the Nazis meeting in Wannsee and taking a decision to murder the Jews. So do you have decisions like that? You have official protocols? Well, since this never happened, of course there are no official protocols showing that there was a decision to starve the Palestinian population. Quite the contrary. Right? It never will be found. It could be fabricated, but it can't be found.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what's the other way in which you can do it? If there's no direct evidence of intent, you do it by circumstantial evidence. You show that, they made a series of decisions and actions that can only be explained as if they're there on the basis of deliberate starvation. Now, there's a problem with making a circumstantial evidence case here, which is the Palestinians haven't starved. And the actions that they're pointing to are they're claiming that Israel did not facilitate enough provision of aid. Now, why on earth, right? Why on earth would you conclude, well, Israel hasn't been generous enough, must mean that it was deliberately trying to starve them? Is somebody else being generous here, more generous than Israel is? How can you possibly reach the conclusion that that proves bad intent? Well, the answer is you can't if you're taking this seriously as a legal proceeding. But nobody in the ICC is doing that. Everybody understands it's purely political. It's a farce. It's a legal farce that's designed to reach a certain politically desired outcome of injustice, of defending the reputation of anti-Semitic terrorists, of anti-Semitic genocidaires, of anti-Semitic war criminals, and to persecute Jews. That's what it's aimed at, and that's what it does. And it doesn't make a difference if it has any legal merit or not. So if you're getting outraged, by looking at, wait, this evidence doesn't prove the case, you're not yet getting the degree to which that's not the game. This is not
Mm-hmm.
a legal game at all. This is not a legal proceeding at all. Of course the evidence is doctored. Of course the evidence is insufficient. Of course the legal theory isn't proved. Nobody has any intention of doing so. This is a game for persecuting Jews. It's not one to make even a colorably arguable legal case.
Avi, I want to thank you so much for being, as I said earlier, so gracious with your time and educating me. I know that you'll have educated everyone who listens to this. I want to give you the last word. There are people who will be stunned by this decision, by this outcome. There are people who will be frightened by this outcome. And there will be some who will even misguidedly question the basis of this outcome and therefore turn inward and say, well, is there something going on there that they need to consider, something that Israel is doing that they need to think about? After all, the ICC is saying that such is the case. What would be your last word to those who are listening, who are, bearers of such considerations, feelings, and fears at this time?
Let's take a broader perspective. The ICC and the ICJ, for that matter, and to a large degree the UN, organizations like UNRWA, they're not the first international institutions that have failed to carry out their missions. Right? The 1930s, for example, provided some very, very stark examples of international institutions that were created in the best of motives and with the greatest of hopes in order to protect human rights and bring an end to war and the rest, like the League of Nations. They were utterly, utterly incapable of carrying out the missions that they were charged with. And we're seeing that again. Let me add, the League of Nations um, collapsed after 20 years, roughly. The UN has been failing to achieve its mission for much, much longer than that. And what we've seen now with the actions of the ICC is that there's something much, much worse than being ineffective. And that is going to the other side, joining the terrorists and the criminals and the worst actors in the world and promoting evil. And that's what you're seeing out of the ICC. That's what you're seeing out of the ICJ. Now, if you're looking at this and you don't know what to think, well, let me tell you, it's time. It's time to put these institutions to rest, because it turns out that it wasn't doing anyone any favors by allowing the UN to go on past its point where it's doing no good. Because by doing that, by allowing this farce to go on over the years, what we've done is created a situation where it is affirmatively doing harm. The ICC should be retired as an organization. The ICJ should be retired as an organization. It may be that the entirety of the UN should be retired, but certainly components of the UN, like the Human Rights Council and UNRWA, should be retired as organizations. They've had opportunities to reform. They won't reform. They won't get better. They may very well continue to be getting worse. Right? It's time to put them to rest.
Professor Avi Bell, thank you so very much for your time. Thank you for your guidance through this very, very difficult subject matter. I appreciate it as always, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.